In today's video, we're going to discuss the tale of two halves that Chelsea experienced last night. We're going to talk about the first half, the few issues that I saw in the first half in possession, and then we're going to talk about the changes that were made at half-time, how this affected the game, and compare the contrasts between the first half and the second. On your screens now is the starting lineup. So as you can see, we started in that 4-2-3-1. Jackson was playing off the left, Palmer in that false 9 again, Madueke on the right, Gallagher in the 10, the same pivot, and then the same back four, except Silva came in for Badiashile. That was the only change to the starting 11 from the team that beat Aston Villa. Now, I'm going to try and talk you through this graphic that I made last night. These were the three main issues that I found in the possession and the build-up of last night's game, and just how we were struggling to keep the ball and progress the ball and make any danger with the ball. So the purple arrow, this represents the distance between the defence and the midfield. So Caicedo was dropping into the midfield up to the defensive line. That was creating that back three. And then the distance between them three and Enzo and Gallagher, especially when we was actually progressed into the second half and we were playing within the Crystal Palace half, we wasn't pushed up enough. There was a few times where it cut to Enzo and he was beckoning the others up the pitch. He wanted them to get higher and to play closer to them so that they could sustain pressure in that half. Then we have the red circle, which is covering Madueke and Gusto. So the main issue here really was Madueke wasn't fully committing to playing in the half space in zone 14, drifting inside, which we'll get onto. He was sort of playing between there and the wide areas, so he'd receive it out wide at times, but him and Gusto were sort of getting in each other's way. They weren't 100% getting each other's way. They were still finding ways to combine, but Madueke wasn't fully committing to going inside where Gusto could then bomb through, so it was sort of nullifying Gusto's chances to get forward and sort of occupy that space, and they were sort of trying to occupy those similar wide areas at times. Madueke prefers to receive the ball out wide and take his man on 1v1 and use width, so those two can work at times, like as we saw against Villa, where Madueke was sort of receiving it in between the half space and driving it forward, and then Gusto would overlap. But at times today, it just looked a bit too in settled possession. They were getting each other's way too much, and they were trying to occupy the same areas. We sort of lacked that half space progressor and creative threat, whereas Madueke and Gusto, they weren't offering that. They both wanted to be that outside right option. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about is this big yellow box that you can see between Enzo, Gallagher, Palmer and Jackson. And this is what we call zone 14. So this is the area where you want to get your players between the lines, between the midfield and defensive line, so that they can affect the game and they can create from that area at the top of the box. Very important to do. And this is something that wasn't happening with the rotations last night because Jackson wouldn't drift into the left half space. He was more trying to push up and make that second striker with Palmer. And as we said with Madueke, he was sort of holding more width, wasn't fully committing to the right half space. So you had that massive gap in zone 14 where nobody was really dropping to receive the ball. And this created a lot of issues. There was no passing, as you can see from these maps, from within zone 14. It was all very horseshoe around the outsides and going down the lines. And then there wasn't enough people attacking the box from zone 14 to create that overload in the box. So what you usually want is your 10 or 2 10s if you're creating a box midfield to then be able to attack the box from zone 14. So you've then got more options when putting the ball into the box from wide, but you've also got ways of getting the ball between the defence and midfield lines of Crystal Palace or whoever the opposition may be, and to be able to create from the top of the box, which is something Palmer does really well. And all the issues that I just mentioned play into this stat, which was that we had one shot on target in 45 minutes, with the most passes been recorded since the Premier League started recording those stats. So we had plenty of possession, plenty of passes, but no threat and no incision to actually get the ball into creative and dangerous areas and affect the game. It was very passive, it was very horseshoe around the outside, and we just wasn't creating enough. But what changed at halftime? I'm going to point this out now. I don't think everything changed brilliantly. I think there was a few minor tweaks that helped, but I don't think it was perfect. I think the early goal really helped just to settle the game down a little bit. Palace still had a few chances in that second half, and it wasn't brilliant, it wasn't perfect, but there was a few things that happened in that second half that made things look a bit better, and that's what allowed us to get that result and a few bits of magic from our key players. Now I'll attempt to talk you through this image. So as you can see, the red line separating Gusto and Chilwell here are showing that there's more clear, direct width options here. So the change made at half-time was Madueke off and Nkunku on. So this pushed Nkunku forward into the number 9, sort of number 10 area with Jackson. So he was playing in that 9. Jackson's still off the left, but still drifting inside. Palmer was now playing on the right, and he was drifting inside into that zone 14 area where he loves to operate. This gave Gusto a lot more opportunity to get forward, and we actually saw this for the first goal, which I'll go over in a minute, where Palmer drags inside, the fullback has to follow him, and then Gusto is in behind. He can now attack that space, so you're not nullifying Gusto's effectiveness going forwards anymore. He's provided great assists from crosses this year. He's brilliant to have as that right-sided width option. So the yellow circles around Gallagher and Palmer now show that these two are now drifting into the half spaces more. They're arriving in the half spaces, they're receiving the ball there, and they're not only receiving the ball there, but they're also driving into there from wider areas. So there was times where Gallagher actually picked it up out on the left. He also then drove the ball inside. That allowed Chilwell to go down the flanks. This zone 14 occupancy that we got from Gallagher and Palmer allowed not only the wing-backs to get forward, but also meant that the Palace defenders and midfielders had to start valuing and stepping up when those players got possession in that hole so that they couldn't get easy shots off or create from that area. So it unsettled the Palace low block, which is something we didn't do in the first half. And lastly, we have the purple arrows. So Levi Colwill came on around the 61st minute for Thiago Silva, and this caused the Chelsea defence to step up and minimise that gap that there was between Colwill, Disasi, Caicedo and Enzo. Caicedo wasn't dropping between the centre-backs as much. He was a little bit higher, so they were sort of making that box of Colwill, Disasi, Caicedo and Enzo in build-up, and that was a lot more effective just to get the team higher up quicker, and it was also very much important to sustain attacks. Late in the game, Disasi was finding himself much closer to the halfway line to win duels against the Palace attackers, keep the ball in the Palace half and create attacks from this. So to keep sustaining pressure, this is something that the best teams do really well, something that Arsenal have been brilliant at this season with their Rice and their inverting fullbacks. So at the weekend it was White and Kivior. They were creating this block of 3 that was just pressuring the I can't remember who they played against now, it's slipped my mind, but they were pushing and they were keeping that ball trapped inside the half. West Ham it was. They kept the ball trapped in the West Ham half, and they're very good at doing it, and this is something that a lot of top elite teams have to do to sustain attacks and score the goals that they do. Here is the example for the first goal that I spoke about. So as you can see, Palmer has received the ball. He's drifted inside from the right, which has caused Tyreek Mitchell to follow him inside. This has then allowed Gusto to make that run in behind. Caicedo's played him through. Gusto finds himself in a nice, wide, isolated area, crosses the ball in, and Gallagher gets the first goal. Then for the second goal, I just wanted to highlight the fact that Gallagher receives this at the top of the box inside zone 14, gets a shot off from that area, which is a very dangerous place for him to be. And of course, he scores that goal. Great finish from Gallagher. He's added those goals in the recent weeks, which has been huge for us. But again, that zone 14 occupancy shows that it's an important area to occupy and make dangerous plays from within that area. And then lastly, for the third goal, this was on the break, so their Palace defence was a bit scattered at this point. It was more of like a 3v3, 2v2 break. But Palmer still finds himself drifting into that zone 14 area to play the pass through to Enzo, who had bombed it up the pitch about 70 yards to get into the box and score the goal. Brilliant finish from him, very cool, calm and collected. And it was brilliant from Palmer, getting into that area where he loves to create from. His decision-making in those areas is usually pretty top-notch. And he gets another assist from zone 14 into Enzo, where we get the third goal and secure the game. So let me know in the comments what you thought of those two halves. Let me know about the first half, what you thought went wrong, and then vice versa. Let me know about the second half, what you thought worked well, what tweaks you liked, and what you would like to see for the next game and moving forwards for Chelsea.